Hi everyone, how are you keeping? I'm going to keep carrying on today with the tree model I mentioned in last week's video. This is a tree that I'm making for a museum exhibit, and when you saw it last week, this was basically a wire frame model. What I've done to it now is these tiny little branches on the end here are bits of electrical flex. I mean, it's ridiculous how much plastic packaging they put around these things. So I had to strip off all of this plastic packaging around to get the twisted copper wire out of the middle, and then wrap that around, splayed it in various instances, and that's formed this branch work coming off here. Now I've left one side, there you go, in its raw branch form so that you can see that. And the other side, I've started building up the layer of foliage on top, and I'm going to talk a bit about both of those things. What I've done before attacking any of it with foliage is that I've done 3 coats of filler on the trunk here. So the first coat, this is, there you go, Tetrion, it's just polyfiller. The powder form, I mixed up a very light mix with PVA glue and a bit of water in, brushed that all over, partly to give the additional layers something to grip to, but also to start filling in where the twists of the wire are. I then did a second thin coat over the top to further smooth it out, and then this top coat here is a very thick mix dabbed on. Just be aware that the filler, when you mix it thickly, it dries quite quickly, so mix a little bit at a time, apply it, mix a little bit more, apply it, and work your way up. And then as it's drying, you're wanting, sorry, I should probably explain a bit more what I mean about thick or thin. So the consistency of the initial 2 coats was a bit like double cream, so mixed with mostly with glue, but a little bit of water just to thin it down until you get kind of cream consistency. Paint that all on with a paintbrush, and actually while that was drying, suspended it upside down so that if there were any drips, they go upwards and they make little nodules sticking upwards rather than very obvious drips coming down off the branches. It looks a bit more natural that way. So that's what I did. The thick coat here was a bit more like clotted cream, and you want it thick enough that you can dab it on and it will stay on the trunk. And then when that was almost dry, I went in with a cocktail stick and just detailed these little bits where there are little nodules in the tree, where the sort of several trunks of the tree kind of growing in together, just giving it a bit of texture, pulling those lines in. Then let it set. Then I sprayed it black from the underside, grey coming down from the top, and then a few spurts around with a green just to add a bit of colour in, and a very, very light speckling with white, just sort of flicking the can to try and get a dappled effect on it. Then I've dry brushed it with a couple of sort of light beige paints, painted the whole trunk, trying to keep the light areas to the main trunk itself and the front here. I want these branches to be quite dark because they're going to be surrounded by foliage. The shading is going to be on them. The highlighting I want to be on this central trunk where you're going to be able to see it. Now because this is going to go in an exhibit, I've structured it so that you're always going to be looking at it from this angle. So this back side has been kept fairly flat. There isn't a lot of detail on here. So that means that I want to try and force the canopy so that you can see a lot of branches around here from the front, and you can see through, and you can see the branches through the foliage, but it has really quite a nice coverage at the back here. So I'm building up the canopy quite thickly here on the back branches, and then going a bit sparser to the front, so that you can see the little bits of branch coming through it. And the way that I'm applying these, I'm using this is MP Scenery Products. If you can see there, that's what is that? Clump Foliage Dark Green Coarse. So that's this that's this foliage on here. For the bits coming around towards the back where I want there to be a bit more of a kind of wall of foliage so that it presents a bit of a backdrop so you can see the silhouette of the tree. For that I'm using the same, but this is fine, and this one comes up in, it's a bit like pulling off chunks of foam, whereas this one is much more like a scouring pad. It's a much more a sort of sheet of material, so that's better for giving a dense cover to the back. But I don't want it for these front areas because I want these to look nice and kind of bushy foliage. And then these top areas here where you can see there's a slightly lighter colour, this again, it's MP Scenery Products, but this is Foliage Clusters, the dark green, and this has got a kind of leafy texture embedded into it. You can see from this box, I mean that's the product. This is how many of the leaves have fallen off. They're not particularly well stuck on, but that's good for me because I'm going to use those and my Model Tree Shop C6 and my Model Tree Shop C15 to then do highlights over the top of these areas. Before I've done anything on the canopy here, I've done the base because I wanted to be able to get my shakers with static grass in the bottom here. So the first thing I did here was paint this with a mixture of brown paint and PVA glue. Then I've applied a coat of tea and coffee mixture over the top here. When that's completely dry, I've painted the whole area with a diluted, very, very diluted PVA glue to try and seat all of that nice and sturdy, and then used a shaker to shake static grass around the side here. Now you can use a what do you call them? There's things that you make out of electric fly swaths that statically charge your static grass, and if I was doing this over a larger area I would do that, but it's hard to get that in here. And actually the shaker does a pretty good job of getting the grass to stand up on end. But just to make sure, once that's dried a little bit, I turn the whole thing upside down, give it a good tap, and it'll knock off some of the grass, but the rest of the grass will end up sticking up and give quite a good grassy effect. And then I've popped in some bits of some C4 Model Tree Shop foliage in here. There's some bits of these came off some cheap Chinese trees that have just fallen apart. There's some little bits of other static grass and leaf litter and things on here. And I think if you're looking for a very naturalistic base, the more textures and colours you can put in there, the better. It makes it look, especially from a distance, makes it read as a natural natural kind of base. And I wanted to not use too much in the way of sponge scatter on the base here because I want it to be marked different texture to what I'm doing on the clump foliage up the top here. So most of my foam is sticking out the top. Now, having got the base in place, I'm trying to start from the inside out for accessibility purposes. So just adjusting these bits where the thin copper is, so that they're kind of flowing in a natural branchy direction. And the kind of temptation at this point is to just try and leave as many of these branches as possible because they look pretty nice. But if you're going to do foliage, it needs to be foliaged over the whole tree. You don't want it to be too sparse, a clump here, a clump there, a clump there, otherwise it won't look like a proper foliage cover on a tree. So you do really need to be bold and go for it and cut and fill in these branches, even if you think they look nice. Leave the odd one, the odd kind of straggly little branch, but yeah, really start dabbing them in there. So I'm going to start off from this side, trying to work on the inside layers here, and I'm using some epoxy 2-part glue because I want this to be to stick in place nice and quickly. So I don't want the PVA glue on here because it's going to be prone to getting knocked off for hours while the PVA glue is drying. If I were to hit this with a hot glue gun, it would be really difficult to get a hot glue gun in here, and also you'd end up with stringy bits everywhere, so much better to use the two-part epoxy. You could use a Yoo-hoo glue if you had that. Something that dries fast and is nice and stiff is going to sit on the branches without dripping everywhere. As you can see, I've nearly used up this tube, so I'm just going to squeeze a little bit out. Don't put too much of this out at a time, because it sets pretty fast, especially in weather like this. Just getting a mixing stick, pop that in half so I've got a nice sharp point there. Yeah, especially in weather like this, it's going to set pretty fast, and you want to be able to position a few pieces carefully. You don't want to worry about dropping everything on at first. So I'm going to start off right in here on these two little twigs. I'm going to put a dollop of the epoxy on there, pull off a little bit, and stick that in place. Now don't worry if these bits don't look totally natural as soon as you put them on, because once they're stuck nice and firmly, you can tease them apart, tweak them, and make them look like they fit. Obviously this is quite tricky, me doing it around the outside. I just wanted to be able to show you the way that I'm applying these. And when you come to apply them to bits like this, these long ends of branches, I'm going to do them in several rows. So I'm going to do a bit on there, try and keep that as a flat, almost like a disc, push it over and let it settle so that it fans out from the branch there. Then leave a gap, put the next bead of glue around, I'm not picking up enough glue here. Okay, put the next bead of glue around there, and then your next disc of foliage pushes on there, leaving a gap between them. And it's these gaps, they call it the sort of negative space of the tree, the way you can see the branches going through and you can see a bit of daylight coming through. That's the thing that really makes this look like a natural tree. If you just put a big blob of foliage in place on here, then it's going to look really odd and very artificial. And try and vary the sizes of your bits of foliage. Typically you're starting large in towards the core of the tree and getting smaller as it goes out, but not always. Sometimes the outer branches spread quite far. So I'm going to try and do all of the inside bits around the front with this, then come to the back and do these branches with the finer pan scourer type stuff, and then coming up to these top branches. Let's start on this one here because I can reach it. So fanning out these bits of copper branch there. So that's going to give me a few different areas to apply the branches, apply the foliage to. Again, popping the glue on there, grabbing just a little bit, popping that on top, and kind of wrapping it a little bit around the branches there. And this lighter colour is going to provide a bit of a highlight. It's going to show you where the crown of the tree is catching more light than the dark foliage on the underside. Let's just put a few bits on there. There we go. So that's how I'm building up this layer of foliage on this side. And then to highlight these clumps, to really bring them out and give the tree its sort of outer shape, I've just got a bit of PVA glue in here that I'm going to dilute. Get that nice and liquid so that it flows into the foam. and then just drop that on the top of these areas that have cured. And you don't be too thorough with it. You want to catch occasional spots on the very top side and the very outside, but you want to leave dark in against the branches and in the areas of shadow, the underneath areas. And then from the top, using my lid to catch any excess, just going to sprinkle a little bit of the C5 there. Onto the top. And once I've finished and this is all set, I'll turn it upside down and give it a good knock, because a lot of this will come off again. Just want a little bit on that top surface to give an idea of the highlighting on there. And then once that's set, I will do the same thing with a very light dollop of the C15, just to really pick the edges out. And what I will do then is scoop up some of this excess leaf stuff that's in here, and give that a bit of a sprinkle on as well, just to add a bit of texture into my canopy. And then I'll have a finished article.